Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you and welcome. Great crowd, we appreciate that. Wonderful weather too. We could just use one more big cloud, that would be helpful. We are the Fall Creek Valley Community Band. Now you may recognize us as a band you saw in the past, but some people came by and offered us a swell deal on some new shirts with a new logo, so we said fine, we'll take it. So we are now the Fall Creek Valley Community Band, a little more representative of the geographical territory we come from. And we want to thank the school system here for allowing us to practice in the Pendleton Middle School. It's great. We appreciate that. Our opening number was one we frequently use entitled American Fanfare. And it's just a great opening number as you have heard. Our next number is entitled, you'll have to give me a second here, Salute to the Cinema. See, if I say the wrong thing, then everybody in the band's screwed up. The name of this piece gives it away. Lots of tunes here to hum along with. You'll know the tunes. The numbers were arranged by Carl Stroman. It features Hooray for Hollywood, Singing in the Rain, Over the Rainbow, As Time Goes By, and A Day in the Life of a Fool. Here's our salute to the cinema. soloists are noted in your program. A couple of other items before we go on here. I always like to announce anybody who's having their 95th birthday today, and we no longer make those people stand. Once they've gotten to 95, we'll just recognize them. But we've got a great guy out here. He comes to almost all our concerts. One of my great groupies, Jack Miller. Raise your hand out there, Jack. His son and granddaughter are in the band here with us as well, so we always appreciate them coming. Also, you'll notice here off to the east is a quilt. Pipes up there. We're not going to take an intermission, so get over there from time to time as you can. That's an interesting quilt. It's got a lot of... Still here? The quilt has a musical theme to it. That's by one of our flute players, Nancy Reed, who's not here today because she's COVID. Hid the quilt long before she had COVID. Anyhow, we're going to have a drawing for that. We're trying to raise a little money for the band to help pay our lavish living expenses. And we'll do that in between a couple numbers here coming up. So if you have any interest, get over there and check it out. And even if you don't, we have a box for donations if you're so inclined to help us out. What we need money for is to buy music, basically. Over here by the Lions. The Lions Club has some food over here for everybody. If you want to support the Lions Club, get over there and check out some of their snacks. Next number is Chorus Line by Marvin Hamlish. Marvin died, I would say 10 years or so ago. He was a great ambassador for pop music, and he was a child prodigy. A few months before he turned 7, in 1951, he was accepted into what is now known as the Juilliard School Pre-College Division. Among his better-known works during the 1970s were adaptations of Scott Joplin's ragtime music for the picture The Sting. His great success in 1973, winning 2 Academy Awards for the title song, Entertainer, and for the motion picture The Angry Bird. He's won lots of awards and a Pulitzer Prize. Sorry to have lost a great musicians like him, but we've got his music, so we're going to play for you a chorus line. mic working or not. Before we do our next number, Shenandoah, I want to give you a little more information about the new name of our band. It's always sort of an emotional, traumatic thing when you try to change the name of a long-time organization. And our board of directors struck. I would like to know if they were considering names they didn't pick. And here's one that was going to be potentially very profitable to us, but we decided not to pick it, and that would have been the Lucas Oil Community Band. But we didn't go with that. The other runner-up was, I still call it Deer Creek Community Band. But we settled on Fall Creek Valley Band, and we're very happy to have that name. So we're happy to be here, too. Our next number, Shenandoah, is a tune you're all familiar with, but nobody really knows where it came from or how it started. This particular version is a 1999 version by a composer by the name of Frank Ticelli, or an arranger. And he said, in writing in his setting of Shenandoah, he was inspired by the freedom and beauty of the folk melody and by the natural images evoked by the word. Actual work from folks on the unknown. Everybody wants a complete version of Shenandoah. Thank you. That's a beautiful tune. Leonard Bernstein, born, by the way, to Russian, Ukrainian immigrants, wrote the music for a musical entitled Wonderful Town. Probably not one you're familiar with. It's from 1953. It was the story of two sisters from Ohio who came to New York City to find fame and fortune. It starred Rosalind Russell. Bernstein wrote this 5 years before the opening of his hit West Side Story on Broadway in 1957. If you listen carefully, you may hear some of his elements of style that appeared later in West Side Story. But as you might guess, it's quite challenging to play something correctly that is supposed to be wrong. Here is the wrong note rag. You will immediately see why. siren there is very appropriate at the end of that. I think now we're going to make a change in director. Is that right, Tim? No? Okay. Leroy Anderson portrait is next. Then we'll make a change, and then we'll do the quilt. Now, Leroy Anderson, if you were around in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, you heard a lot of his music, but you probably didn't always associate it with his name. He was very involved with the Boston Pops. He wrote a lot of well-known music, and this is just a collection of some of his well-known pieces. Now, you'll recognize some of them, but there's one piece in here I want to take a personal note to tell you. If you were in the band about 50 years ago, and you went to contests for solo and ensembles, you inevitably heard in the background the trumpets practicing something called the Bugler's Holiday. Every junior high and high school kid played it ad nauseum. I'm sure their parents knew it by note. And that number is featured in here as one of the numbers of the Leroy Anderson portrait. So if you can think back to your junior high school days, you might enjoy this. A Leroy Anderson portrait. Hope you recognize all those tunes, but maybe you didn't even know where you recognized them from. It was from the 1960s. That's where you recognize them from. Okay, now the excitement's been building for the quilt drawing. And if you haven't gotten over there and made your contribution, it's too late. I'm not sure who's doing the drawing. Richard, are you doing the drawing? This drawing is governed under the auspices of nobody. And you just have to take our word for it. But I know whoever gets it's going to enjoy that. There you see the official churning of the ballots. There'd be no doubt that this is on the up and up.
Wait a minute, you lost my screen.
Can we have a drum roll, please? It's pitiful, but we got it. All right, here we go. Read it out loud. The sealed envelope is being brought to me now. I didn't know my sister was here tonight. The winning person is named Ticket, T-I-C-K-E-T. Oh, no, wait, no, there's more. Tom Smay. Tom Smay, is it? Sorry for the name. You don't have to be here to be a winner, by the way. We know Tom? All right. Is Tom here to pick up and acknowledge his award or not? Okay, we'll get it to him. Thank you, Tom, and thanks for everybody else who contributed. And thanks to Nancy for making that beautiful quilt. That's really something. I don't think I could do that. All right, back to the music. Our next number is entitled Wildflowers. Another number you probably have not heard, but it's a very pretty number. I think you'll like it. It is a 2018 tune by an arranger composer by the name of Todd Stalter. He claims it's an attempt to portray the feeling of gazing upon a meadow of flowers on a bright summer day. See what you think. Pretty tune, Wildflowers. Thank you. Hope you agree that was pretty. Next on the program, you'll see a tune entitled Red's White and Blue March. And this is by Red Skelton. Yes, you heard correctly. Red Skelton. We all remember he was a successful vaudeville entertainer, but he had several other talents, including painting. It's thought that he made more money from his famous clown paintings than his other endeavors. But this Vincennes, Indiana native also composed or arranged some music, including this one, Red's White and Blue March.
We can tell Red had a little bit of patriotism in him. Thank him for writing that tune. Speaking of talented people, our next number is entitled Theme to Yellowstone. The music was composed by a gentleman by the name of Brian Tyler, but it was arranged for band by our own Richard Hook, who's going to direct us in his arrangement of Theme to Yellowstone. Thank you, Richard, for conducting and arranging that. Now, folks out there, when you go to work or school or play tomorrow, wherever you are, and you tell all the people you're with that they missed a fantastic concert, of course, you can also tell them that this is probably the only place in the world tonight that that tune was played by a concert band. Now, someday in the future, that may be different. That may be a staple of outdoor concert band music, but I think this is the only place you'll get it this evening. Thank you. Thanks, Richard. That's the second piece he's arranged for us, so maybe he'll have more for us in the future. Our next number is entitled Wishing Well. This is a 2019 piece by Rossano Galante. Now, if you've followed our band for many years, you know that we play quite a few things by Mr. Galante. He usually loves soaring, movie-type theme works. And this piece is intended to project the image of a child approaching a wishing well and making a wish. At least at the beginning, it's a little more understated than some of his tunes, but he eventually gets into his style, and I know you're going to enjoy The Wishing Well. program shows, we have one more number, the number entitled Jubilance. Nobody knows what this means, but I think when you hear it played, you'll realize it's very suited to the tune. Like James Swearingen, we play a lot of his music as well. I also want to make sure that we mention that our other co-director who conducted a few numbers tonight is Tim Stone King over here. Trumpet section. Thank you, Tim. So we appreciate these guys and all the time they put in trying to corral us and make us sound better and making music for you people. We certainly enjoy you coming out this evening, and hope you'll do it again next year. Hope we're here next year. So thanks again. Jubilance.
Thank you very much. Again, you see now why it's called Jubilance. Couldn't have been called anything else, I don't think.
We have one.
Well, if you have a program in front of you, you'll see at the bottom it says possible encore. Well, that's kind of fraudulent. There's never been a show that doesn't have an encore, especially when we put it in the program. And it's so fraudulent that we already have this set up so that our tuba player, Mark Mordew, fabulous tuba player, is going to do part of the ending where you usually hear the flutes. We're going to have the flute and piccolo too, but we're also going to have a tuba in one section. Mr. Mark Mordew is going to do us a favor of playing for Stars and Stripes Forever by John Philip Sousa, one of his favorites. And thanks again so much for coming.
Yeah. Started the program now.
Look,
Yeah.
it's in the shade now.
But yeah, you could, but that way you've been in the shade.